The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty timber building, and Penelope Norwood pressed her gloved hand against her churning stomach, wondering if she had made the gravest mistake of her life by agreeing to marry a man she had never met. The year was 1897, and she had traveled all the way from Boston to Randsburg, California, answering an advertisement placed by Thomas Xavier, a rancher who claimed he needed a wife to help run his sprawling cattle operation in the high desert. Penelope stepped down from the coach, her emerald traveling dress already covered in a fine layer of dust, despite her best efforts to remain presentable. The sun blazed overhead with an intensity she had never experienced back east, and the air felt dry and thin in her lungs. Randsburg sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the edge of civilization, surrounded by sagebrush and rocky hills that shimmered in the afternoon heat. The town had grown around the nearby gold mines, and she could see the evidence of that prosperity in the well-stocked general store and the newly painted hotel. A tall figure detached itself from the shadows of the building's porch, and Penelope's breath caught. The man who approached her moved with an easy confidence that spoke of years spent working outdoors. He wore dusty denims, a blue cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. When he stepped into the sunlight, she found herself staring at perhaps the most striking man she had ever seen. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and his eyes were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. A strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a mouth that looked like it smiled often completed a face that made her heart perform an unexpected flutter. "Miss Norwood." His voice was deep and warm, with a hint of something that sounded almost apologetic. "Yes, I am Penelope Norwood. Are you Thomas Xavier?" She extended her hand, trying to maintain the proper decorum her mother had drilled into her. The man removed his hat, revealing more of that handsome face, and she noticed the way his hair fell across his forehead. "No, madam. I am Cole Xavier. Thomas is my brother." He took her hand gently, and even through her glove she felt the warmth of his calloused palm. "I am afraid I have some difficult news to share with you." Penelope's stomach dropped. The long journey, the uncertainty, the fear she had pushed down for weeks suddenly came rushing back. "What has happened? Is your brother unwell?" Cole's amber eyes filled with genuine sorrow, and he gestured toward the hotel. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more comfortable. You have had a long journey, and this news deserves better than a dusty street corner." She followed him across the dirt road, acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople. A woman in a fine dress was still something of a novelty in Randsburg, though the mining boom had brought more families to the area. Cole carried her two large trunks as though they weighed nothing, his strong shoulders flexing beneath his shirt. Penelope scolded herself for noticing such details when her intended husband had apparently met with some misfortune. The hotel lobby was modest but clean, with polished wood floors and simple furniture. Cole secured her a room and carried her trunks upstairs, then waited while she freshened up. When she emerged 15 minutes later, having washed the worst of the travel dust from her face and hands, he was standing by the window, staring out at the street with an expression of deep concern. "Please, tell me what has happened to Thomas," Penelope said, settling into one of the chairs near the window. She folded her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Cole turned to face her, and she saw him struggling with how to begin. He pulled a chair closer and sat down, leaning forward with his hat balanced on his knee. 3 weeks ago, there was an accident. Thomas was breaking a new horse, a wild Mustang he had purchased from a trader passing through. The animal threw him, and he struck his head on a fence post. He paused, his jaw working as he clearly fought with difficult emotions. He never woke up. We buried him a week ago Tuesday, up on the hill where he always said he wanted to rest." The words hung in the air between them, and Penelope felt the world tilt slightly. She had prepared herself for many possibilities, but not this. Not to arrive as a bride only to find herself at a funeral that had already happened. "I am so very sorry for your loss," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am sorry for yours as well," Cole said softly. "I know you were expecting a future here, a new life. Thomas spoke of you often after receiving your letters. He was excited to meet you, to start a family." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small packet of letters tied with string. "These are yours. I thought you might want them back." Penelope recognized her own handwriting on the envelopes, the careful words she had penned describing her life in Boston, her hopes for the future, her nervousness about traveling west. She took them from Cole, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. "Thank you. That is very thoughtful." They sat in silence for a moment, and Penelope tried to process what this meant for her. She had used all her savings to purchase her ticket west. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving debts that had consumed everything. Her mother had remarried quickly, to a man who made it clear that Penelope was not welcome in his household. She had no home to return to, no family who wanted her, and now no future husband to provide for her. "What will you do?" Cole asked, as though reading her thoughts. "I honestly do not know," Penelope admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Something about this man invited confidence, made her want to speak truthfully rather than hide behind polite social conventions. "I have very little money left, certainly not enough for passage back to Boston. And even if I did, I have nothing to return to there." Cole was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "The ranch still needs help," he said slowly. "Thomas and I ran it together, but it is too much work for one man alone. We have 200 head of cattle, horses to tend, and the house itself needs a woman's touch. I know this is not what you planned, but if you were willing to stay on as a housekeeper, at least for a time, it would give you a chance to figure out your next steps. I would pay you a fair wage and you would have a safe place to live." Penelope looked at him carefully, trying to judge his character. She had been raised to be cautious around men, to protect her reputation above all else. But there was something in Cole's eyes that seemed genuine, a decency that she wanted to trust. "That is a generous offer, but what would people say? A single woman living on a ranch with a single man. There is a married couple who work for me, Samuel and Martha Jennings. They live in a cabin on the property. Martha could serve as a chaperone of sorts, and the town would have less to gossip about." Cole stood and walked back to the window. "I will not pretend this is an ideal situation, Miss Norwood. But I am trying to offer you an option that does not involve you being stranded in a strange town with no resources." She appreciated his directness and his recognition of the awkwardness of the situation. "May I have the evening to consider your offer?" "Of course. I have taken a room at the boarding house down the street. I will come by tomorrow morning and you can give me your answer then." He settled his hat back on his head and moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it is worth, Thomas chose well when he chose you. Your letters showed intelligence and spirit, and I can see why he was looking forward to your arrival. I am truly sorry that things turned out this way." After he left, Penelope stood at the window and watched him cross the street, his long stride eating up the distance. She pressed her forehead against the glass, which still held warmth from the afternoon sun. What choice did she really have? She could try to find work in town, but her skills were limited to household management and a bit of teaching. She could attempt to return to Boston and throw herself on the mercy of distant relatives who had shown no interest in helping her before. Or she could accept Cole Xavier's offer and at least have a roof over her head while she planned her next move. That night, she lay in the narrow hotel bed and thought about the unexpected turn her life had taken. She had been so nervous about meeting Thomas, worried that he would find her plain or disappointing. Now she would never know what might have been. Instead, she found herself thinking about his brother, about the genuine kindness in Cole's amber eyes and the gentle way he had delivered such difficult news. The next morning, she washed and dressed in a simpler gown of dove gray cotton, more suitable for ranch life than her traveling dress. She braided her long auburn hair and pinned it in a coronet around her head, then went downstairs to wait for Cole. He arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. The scent of soap and sunshine seemed to cling to him. "I will accept your offer," Penelope said without preamble. "I would like to work as your housekeeper, at least until I can determine a more permanent solution to my circumstances." Relief washed over Cole's face, and she realized he had been genuinely worried about what would become of her. "I am glad. I think you will like the ranch. It is hard work, but there is something honest about it, something real." They spent the morning arranging for her trunks to be loaded onto a wagon Cole had brought into town. He introduced her to several townspeople, including the doctor, the schoolteacher, and the woman who ran the general store. Each time he explained that she had come west to marry Thomas and would now be working as his housekeeper. The townspeople offered their condolences and seemed to accept the arrangement without too much speculation. The ride out to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, following a rough track that wound through the high desert landscape. Penelope found herself fascinated by the scenery, so different from the green rolling hills of Massachusetts. Here, everything was browns and golds, with splashes of sage green and the occasional bright wildflower clinging to life, despite the harsh conditions. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat in the valleys. Cole proved to be good company on the ride, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. "Randsburg started as a mining town about 6 years ago," he explained. "Gold mostly, with some silver mixed in. Thomas and I came out here looking for our fortune in the mines, but we quickly realized that ranching was steadier work and suited us better. We saved our money and bought the land 5 years ago. You ever regret not searching for gold?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious. "Not for a moment. I would rather build something that lasts than chase after a dream that might disappear in a season. The ranch is real, something you can see and touch and improve with honest work." He glanced over at her. "What about you?" "Do you regret coming west?" Penelope considered the question carefully. "Ask me again in a few months. Right now, I am still too uncertain to know what I feel." The ranch, when they finally arrived, took her breath away. A large 2-story house sat in a valley between 2 rocky hills, with a barn, several outbuildings, and corrals spread around it. A creek ran through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. The house itself was built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was larger and more substantial than she had expected, clearly built by men who intended to make this place a permanent home. Martha Jennings came out to greet them, a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind blue eyes and flour dusting her apron. "You must be Miss Norwood. Cole told me you would be coming. I have prepared the guest room for you, the one on the east side with the nice morning light." Penelope liked her immediately and felt some of her tension ease. Martha helped her settle into her room, which was indeed lovely, with whitewashed walls and simple but well-made furniture. A colorful quilt covered the bed, and curtains made of butter-yellow fabric framed the windows. Through the glass, She could see the creek and the cottonwood trees swaying in the breeze. Over the next few days, Penelope began to settle into a routine. She took over the household tasks, which had been somewhat neglected in the weeks since Thomas's death. She cleaned and organized, cooked meals, and began making small improvements to make the house more comfortable. Martha came up from her cabin each morning to help with the heavier work, and the two women developed an easy friendship. Cole maintained a respectful distance, always polite but never overly familiar. He rose before dawn to work with the cattle and horses, often returning to the house exhausted and covered in dust. Penelope found herself watching for him at mealtimes, noticing the way he moved, the sound of his laugh when Samuel told a joke, the careful attention he paid to every detail of the ranch operation. One evening about 2 weeks after her arrival, Penelope was sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Cole came up the steps, moving a bit stiffly, and she noticed him favoring his left side. "Are you hurt?" she asked, setting aside the mending she had been working on. "Just a disagreement with a stubborn calf," Cole said, attempting to smile. "Nothing serious." "Let me look at it," Penelope said firmly. When he hesitated, she added, "I helped care for my father during his final illness. I know something about treating injuries." Cole slowly unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a nasty bruise spreading across his ribs, purple and angry looking. Penelope drew in a sharp breath but kept her expression calm. "Wait here," she instructed, then went inside to gather supplies. She returned with clean cloths, a basin of cool water, and a tin of salve Martha had given her. As she gently cleaned the area around the bruise, she was acutely aware of the warmth of his skin, the way his muscles tensed under her touch. This was far more intimate than she had intended, and she could feel her cheeks growing warm. "You should be more careful," she said, trying to focus on the task rather than the way her heart was racing. "I will try," Cole said, his voice rough, "though cattle are not always cooperative." She applied the salve as gently as she could, but he still winced. "I am sorry, I know it must hurt." "It is not so bad," he said softly. "You have gentle hands." Their eyes met, and Penelope felt something shift between them, some acknowledgement of the attraction that had been building since the moment they met. She stepped back quickly, gathering her supplies. "You should rest tonight. No more heavy work tomorrow if you can avoid it." "Yes, madam," Cole said, a hint of amusement in his voice. As the weeks passed, Penelope found herself falling in love with the ranch and the rhythm of life there. She woke to the sound of birds in the cottonwood trees and fell asleep to the distant lowing of cattle. She learned to make bread in the temperamental wood stove, to preserve vegetables for the winter, and to identify the different plants that grew wild on the property. Martha taught her about desert living, about conserving water and staying cool in the intense summer heat. But more than the ranch, she found herself falling for Cole Xavier. She noticed everything about him, from the way he treated his animals with patient kindness to the careful attention he paid to Samuel and Martha, making sure they had everything they needed. He was unfailingly respectful toward her, but she caught him watching her sometimes, a look in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. One afternoon in late August, a group of riders approached the ranch. Cole met them in the yard, and Penelope watched from the kitchen window as he spoke with them. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself. When the men finally rode away, Cole came into the house looking troubled. "What was that about?" Penelope asked, setting down the pitcher of lemonade she had been about to bring out to the porch. "Trouble, most likely," Cole said, running a hand through his hair. "There is a man named Robert Finch who owns the property to our north. He has been trying to buy out smaller ranchers in the area, and he does not take kindly to anyone who refuses to sell." Those men work for him, and they were making it clear that he wants our water rights. What will you do? Penelope felt a flutter of fear. She had heard stories about range wars and violent disputes over land and water. Stand my ground. This ranch belonged to Thomas and me, and now it is mine. I will not be bullied into selling by some land grabber who thinks he can own the whole territory. Cole's voice was firm, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Over the following weeks, tensions escalated. Fences were cut, allowing cattle to wander. A fire started mysteriously in one of the hay barns, though Samuel managed to put it out before it caused serious damage. Cole increased the patrols of the property, and he began teaching Penelope how to shoot, insisting that she needed to be able to protect herself if trouble came to the house when he was out on the range. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch after supper, Cole suddenly said, "You should know that you can leave any time you want, Penelope. I will give you enough money to go somewhere safe, maybe to San Francisco where you could find decent work. I do not want you caught in the middle of this dispute." Penelope turned to face him, surprised by the surge of emotion his words provoked. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Cole said immediately, his amber eyes intense in the fading light. "No, I do not want that at all. But I need you to be safe, and I am worried about what Finch might do." "Then I will stay," Penelope said firmly. "This is my home now, Cole. I will not abandon it or you just because some bully wants to frighten us away." Something changed in Cole's expression, a kind of relief mixed with something deeper, something that made Penelope's breath catch. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met," he said softly. "I am not brave at all," Penelope whispered. "I am terrified most of the time, but I have found something here that I did not expect, something worth fighting for." "What have you found?" Cole asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "A home, a purpose. And maybe," she paused, gathering her courage, "maybe something more than that." Cole stood, pulling her gently to her feet. They stood close together, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "Penelope, I know this is complicated. You came here to marry my brother, and I have no right to feel the way I do about you, but I cannot help it. From the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking so determined despite your fear, I felt something I have never felt before." "What did you feel?" Penelope asked, her heart hammering in her chest. "Like I was looking at my future," Cole said simply. "Like everything I had been building here suddenly made sense because you were going to be part of it." Penelope reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble along his jaw. "I came here to marry a Xavier brother, and I still intend to, if he will have me. It just happens to be a different brother than I originally planned." Cole's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Cole Xavier. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you took my hand that first day and looked at me with such kindness when you delivered such difficult news. I am saying that I do not want to be your housekeeper anymore. I want to be your wife, if you will have me." Cole's answer was to pull her into his arms and kiss her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed of and more. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Stay and marry me instead," he whispered. "Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to build a life here with me. Say yes, Penelope." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Randsburg, with Martha and Samuel standing as witnesses. Penelope wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had brought in her troop, originally intended for her wedding to Thomas. She felt a moment of sadness for the man she had never met, but also a sense that somehow this was how things were meant to be. Martha helped her arrange her hair with small yellow roses from the garden, and when Penelope walked down the aisle to where Cole stood waiting, the look of love and wonder on his face took her breath away. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Cole's voice was steady as he promised to love and cherish her, and Penelope felt tears slide down her cheeks as she made the same promises to him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her gently, then whispered against her lips, "Thank you for staying." They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, with some of the neighboring ranchers and townspeople attending. Even in the midst of the tensions with Finch, people came to celebrate with them, bringing gifts of food and household goods. Penelope stood beside her new husband, greeting guests and accepting their congratulations, feeling like she had finally found where she belonged. That night, after the last guest had departed and the house was quiet, Cole led Penelope upstairs to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He was nervous, she could tell, and it touched her that this strong, confident man was worried about making this night special for her. "We can take this as slowly as you need," Cole said, cupping her face in his hands. "I want this to be right, Penelope. I want you to feel loved and cherished, not rushed or frightened." Penelope smiled, feeling her own nervousness fade in the face of his tender concern. "I trust you, Cole. I love you, and I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of gentle discoveries and whispered words of love. Cole was patient and attentive, making sure Penelope felt safe and loved throughout. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Penelope felt a completeness she had never known was possible. The next few months brought challenges as well as joy. Finch continued his attempts to drive them off the land, but Cole stood firm, and the other ranchers began to band together to resist the land grabbers' intimidation tactics. Penelope threw herself into making their house a real home, and she began to build relationships with the other ranch wives in the area. In November, she realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She was excited to start a family with Cole, but she worried about how the continued tensions with Finch might affect their child. When she told Cole the news one evening after supper, he picked her up and spun her around, his face alight with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Penelope, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover what I feel right now," Cole said, placing his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "This baby, this life we are building together, it is everything I have ever wanted." Winter came early that year, with a surprise snowstorm blanketing the high desert in mid-December. The ranch took on a magical quality, the harsh landscape softened by white drifts. Cole made sure the cattle had access to shelter and food, working long hours to keep the herd safe. Penelope spent her days keeping the house warm and preparing for the baby's arrival. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the fire, Cole handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a delicate gold locket, engraved with both their initials intertwined. "I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows how much you mean to me," he said softly. Penelope opened the locket and found 2 small spaces for photographs. "We will put our family in here," she said, touching the empty spaces. "As it grows." "I like the sound of that," Cole said, pulling her into his arms. The conflict with Finch came to a head in late January. Penelope was 7 months pregnant, feeling heavy and ungainly, when word came that Finch's men had been caught trying to poison one of the water sources on a neighboring ranch. The territorial marshal arrived to investigate, and the resulting inquiry uncovered a pattern of intimidation, theft, and violence. Finch was arrested, and many of his hired men fled the area to avoid prosecution. The day the marshal came to tell them that Finch would be going to trial and the harassment would stop, Penelope felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in months. Cole held her close, and she felt their baby kick vigorously between them, as if celebrating the news as well. "It is really over," she said, hardly daring to believe it. "It is over, and we can focus on what matters now, building our family, raising our child, making this ranch into something we can be proud of." Cole kissed the top of her head. "I love you so much, Penelope. Thank you for being brave enough to stay, for giving me a chance." "Thank you for asking me to," Penelope replied, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." Their son was born on a bright March morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Cole was there for the birth, holding Penelope's hand and murmuring encouragement through the long hours of labor. When the midwife finally placed the squirming, red-faced bundle in Penelope's arms, Cole sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at his son with an expression of such love and wonder that Penelope fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant immediately grasped it, holding on with surprising strength. "Look at that grip. He is going to be a rancher for sure. What should we name him?" Penelope asked, studying her son's face, already seeing traces of Cole in the shape of his nose and chin. Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "I would like to name him Thomas, after my brother, if that is acceptable to you." "I think Thomas would have loved being an uncle, and this way his name will live on." Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes. "I think that is beautiful. Thomas Cole Xavier." "Thomas Cole Xavier," Cole repeated, testing the name. "Welcome to the world, son. We have been waiting for you." The next few years brought their share of challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to prosper under Cole's careful management, and Penelope discovered that she had a gift for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to maximize their profits. They added more cattle, improved their breeding stock, and built a reputation for quality animals. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's amber eyes and his mother's auburn hair. He followed Cole everywhere, learning to ride before he could walk properly and showing an early fascination with the cattle and horses. When Thomas was 2, Penelope became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine. The little girl was quieter than her brother, with Cole's dark hair and Penelope's green eyes. Cole doted on his daughter, and Penelope often found him in the nursery, holding Catherine while she slept, a look of pure contentment on his face. By their 5th wedding anniversary, the ranch had grown to over 500 head of cattle, and they employed several ranch hands in addition to Samuel. Martha had become like family, helping to care for the children and running the household when Penelope was busy with ranch business. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas chase fireflies while Catherine toddled after him, Cole took Penelope's hand. "Do you remember that first day when I met you at the stagecoach? How could I forget?" Penelope said, squeezing his hand. "I was so frightened, and you were so kind." "I was terrified," Cole admitted. "Terrified that you would take one look at this dusty ranch town and get right back on that stagecoach. Terrified that I would not be able to help you, that I would fail my brother one last time by not taking care of the woman he had chosen." "You did not fail Thomas," Penelope said firmly. "You honored him by helping me, by offering me a home and a future. And then you gave me something I never expected to find. You gave me love, Cole. Real, true, lasting love. You gave me that too, Cole said softly. You came here as a bride for my brother, and instead you became the love of my life. You made this house a home, gave me two beautiful children, and stood by me through every challenge. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the gathering dusk. I used to wonder if I had made a mistake coming west, if I was running away from my problems rather than facing them. But now I understand that I was not running from something. I was running toward something. Toward you, toward this life, toward the family we would build together. I am glad you stayed, Cole whispered, kissing her temple. So am I, Penelope said, turning to look at her husband, this man she loved more than she had ever thought possible to love anyone. So am I. The years continued to pass, bringing more children and more growth to the ranch. When Thomas was 5 and Catherine 3, Penelope gave birth to twin boys, Connor and Christopher, who arrived early one morning in late autumn. Cole was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, watching his wife deliver not one but two sons. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children laughing, playing, and occasionally arguing. Penelope had never been happier than she was managing her growing household, finding a balance between being a mother, a wife, and a partner in the ranch business. Cole had built an addition onto the house to accommodate their expanding family, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The town of Randsburg continued to grow as well, attracting more families as the mining operation stabilized. A proper school was built, and Penelope helped organize a women's auxiliary that raised money for community improvements. She became friends with many of the other ranchers' wives, women who shared her experiences of adapting to life in the harsh but beautiful high desert. When Thomas turned 7, he started school in town, though he made it clear that he would rather be working on the ranch with his father. Cole was patient with his oldest son, teaching him everything he knew about cattle, horses, and land management. Catherine showed an early talent for drawing, filling notebook after notebook with sketches of the ranch, the animals, and her family. The twins were still too young for much beyond mischief, but they showed promise of inheriting their father's love for the outdoors. One spring afternoon, when Penelope was 30 years old and had been married to Cole for nearly 8 years, she was working in her vegetable garden when she saw a stagecoach approaching on the road from town. It was unusual to see visitors at the ranch unannounced, and she stood, brushing dirt from her hands, watching as the coach came to a stop in front of the house. A woman stepped down, younger than Penelope, with blonde hair and a fashionable traveling suit that marked her as someone from back east. Cole came out of the barn, and Penelope walked over to join him as they greeted the unexpected visitor. "Can we help you?" Cole asked politely. The young woman looked between them, seeming nervous. "Are you Cole Xavier? And is this Penelope?" "Yes," Cole said, his hand finding Penelope's. "I am Cole Xavier, and this is my wife, Penelope. May I ask who you are?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell," the woman said. "I came here because I am looking for Thomas Xavier. I was engaged to marry him, and I have traveled all the way from Ohio." Penelope felt her heart sink. Another mail-order bride, arriving to marry a man who had been dead for years. She squeezed Cole's hand, and he squeezed back, a silent communication passing between them. "Miss Mitchell, I am very sorry to tell you this, but Thomas Xavier died 8 years ago in a ranching accident," Cole said gently. "I am his brother." Sarah's face went pale and she swayed slightly. Penelope immediately moved forward, taking the younger woman's arm. "Come inside. You have had a shock, and you need to sit down. We will explain everything." Over the next hour, sitting in the comfortable parlor that Penelope had made so welcoming, they told Sarah the story of Thomas's death. But they did not tell her about Penelope's own arrival as a mail-order bride, and Penelope found herself wondering about the timeline. Had Thomas been corresponding with multiple women? Or had there been some confusion? As if reading her mind, Sarah pulled a packet of letters from her bag. Thomas and I had been writing for 6 months. In his last letter, received just before I left Ohio, he asked me to come west and marry him. He said he had a successful ranch and wanted a wife to share it with. Cole took the letters, frowning as he looked at the dates. "These are dated after Thomas died," he said slowly. "The handwriting looks like his, but that is impossible." Penelope took one of the letters, studying it carefully, then went to her room and returned with the letters Thomas had written to her. Laying them side by side, it became clear that while similar, the handwriting was not quite the same. "Someone was impersonating your brother," she said to Cole, feeling anger rise. "Someone was using his name to lure women west." The mystery was eventually solved with the help of the marshal. It turned out that one of Finch's former associates, angry about the loss of his employer and looking for revenge, had been sending false letters using Thomas Xavier's name, hoping to cause trouble and embarrassment for Cole. The man was eventually caught and prosecuted, but the damage was done. Sarah was stranded in California with no husband and no resources. Penelope made the same offer to Sarah that Cole had once made to her. "Stay here as my assistant. I need help managing the household now that we have 4 children, and you would have a safe place to live while you figure out what you want to do." Sarah gratefully accepted, and she became part of their extended family. Over time, she caught the eye of the new schoolteacher in town, a kind man named Benjamin Hartwell who had moved to Randsburg from Sacramento. They courted for a year before marrying, and Sarah remained one of Penelope's closest friends. The incident reminded Penelope of how different her life might have been if Cole had not been such an honorable man, if he had not offered her help and eventually his heart. She told him as much one night, after they had put the children to bed and were finally alone. "I could have been like Sarah, stranded and alone, taken in by strangers who might not have had good intentions. But you took care of me, Cole. You offered me not just shelter, but respect and kindness and eventually love." "You took care of me too," Cole said, pulling her close. "You made this house a home, gave me a family, stood by me through every challenge. We took care of each other, Penelope, and that is what marriage should be." By their 10th wedding anniversary, the ranch was one of the most successful in the region. Cole had earned a reputation as a fair and knowledgeable rancher, and Penelope was known throughout the county for her business acumen and her charitable work. Together, they had built something lasting and meaningful. The anniversary celebration was held at the ranch, with friends and neighbors coming from miles around to help them celebrate. Martha had outdone herself with the food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Penelope wore a new dress of deep green silk that Cole had ordered specially from San Francisco, and he wore a suit that made him look even more handsome than usual. As they danced together under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved and the land they had worked so hard to build up, Penelope felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I love you," she whispered to Cole, loud enough only for him to hear. "I love you more today than I did when we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is good," Cole said, his amber eyes warm in the lamplight, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life giving you reasons to love me more each day." Thomas, now 10 years old and already showing signs of the man he would become, danced with his mother, his steps careful and formal. "Father says you are the best thing that ever happened to him," he told her seriously. "Your father is the best thing that ever happened to me," Penelope replied, touched by her son's words. Catherine, at 8 years old, was sketching the party scene, capturing the joy and celebration with surprising skill. The twins, now 5, were chasing each other around the yard, full of energy despite the late hour. As Penelope looked around at her family, her friends, the ranch that had become her beloved home, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in Randsburg as a mail-order bride, frightened and uncertain, with nothing but a couple of trunks and a determination to make a new life for herself. She had expected to marry Thomas Xavier, a man she had never met, and build a life with a stranger. Instead, she had found Cole, a man who had offered her respect before love, friendship before passion, and who had built with her a partnership based on trust and mutual regard. Their love had grown from those foundations, deepening with each passing year, strengthened by the challenges they had faced together. The ranch prospered through the years that followed. Cole made smart decisions about breeding stock and land management, and Penelope's careful financial planning ensured they had reserves for difficult times. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, good years and bad, always together, always supporting each other. When Thomas turned 16, he told his parents that he wanted to attend agricultural college in San Francisco. Penelope was torn between pride in her son's ambition and sadness at the thought of him leaving. Cole, however, supported the decision wholeheartedly. "Let him learn everything he can," Cole said. "He will come back to the ranch with new ideas and fresh knowledge. We need to adapt and grow, and Thomas will help us do that." Thomas did indeed return after his education, bringing with him innovative ideas about irrigation, crop rotation, and cattle breeding. He also brought home a wife, a lovely young woman named Elizabeth who had grown up on a ranch in the Central Valley and understood ranch life in her bones. Catherine surprised everyone by announcing that she wanted to go to art school in San Francisco. Cole was initially hesitant, worried about his daughter living alone in the city, but Penelope championed Catherine's dreams. "She has real talent, Cole. We cannot hold her back just because we are afraid. We raised her to be strong and independent, and now we have to trust that she will use those qualities to build the life she wants." Catherine left for San Francisco when she was 18, and while Penelope missed her desperately, she was proud of her daughter's courage and determination. Catherine wrote frequent letters, sharing details of her studies and her growing success as an illustrator. She eventually had her drawings published in several magazines and newspapers, achieving a level of independence few women of her generation enjoyed. The twins, Connor and Christopher, proved to be as different as two people could be despite sharing a birthday. Connor loved the ranch and working with animals, much like his father and older brother. Christopher, however, was fascinated by the mechanical side of ranching. He spent hours tinkering with equipment, finding ways to make operations more efficient. When automobiles began appearing in California in the early 1900s, Christopher was fascinated and eventually opened a garage in Randsburg, serving the growing number of motorized vehicles in the area. As Penelope entered her 40s, she found herself thinking often about the choices that had brought her to this life. She had never regretted her decision to stay in Randsburg, to accept Cole's offer of work, and eventually to marry him. Every challenge they had faced together. Every joy had been doubled because they shared it. Cole remained as devoted to her as he had been on their wedding day. He still reached for her hand without thinking, still looked at her with warmth and appreciation, still made her feel like the most important person in his world. Their physical relationship had matured and deepened over the years, becoming a source of comfort and connection that sustained them through difficult times. One evening in the spring of 1910, they sat together on the porch they had sat on so many times before, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were alone for once, with Thomas and Elizabeth living in their own house on the property, Catherine in San Francisco, and the twins in town for the evening. "You ever think about that first day?" Cole asked, echoing a conversation they had had many times over the years. "All the time," Penelope admitted. "I think about how frightened I was, how uncertain about my future. I think about how kind you were, even though you were delivering such difficult news. I think about how close I came to leaving, to giving up and trying to go back to Boston." "I am glad you stayed," Cole said, the same words he had said so many times before. "I am glad you asked me to," Penelope replied, the response that had become almost ritual between them. But then she added, "I am glad you saw me, Cole. Not just as your brother's intended bride, not just as a woman who needed help, but as a person worth knowing, worth loving. You gave me that gift and it changed my life." "You changed mine too," Cole said softly. "I thought I knew what I wanted from life. A successful ranch, financial security, maybe eventually a family. But then you stepped off that stagecoach, and I realized I had been missing the most important thing. Love. Real, deep, transformative love. The kind that makes everything else in life matter more." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet around them, the cattle settled for the night, the horses dozing in their stalls. It was peaceful in a way that Penelope had learned to appreciate, the peace that came from hard work and love and building something lasting. "I have been thinking," Cole said eventually, "that maybe it is time to start stepping back a bit. Thomas is fully capable of running the ranch now, and he has good ideas about where to take it in the future. I am not saying I want to retire completely, but maybe we could travel a bit, see some of the places we have always talked about visiting." Penelope turned to look at her husband, seeing the gray that now threaded through his dark hair, the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes. He was 50 now, still strong and capable, but she understood what he was saying. They had worked hard for decades, building and improving and always pushing forward. Perhaps it was time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. "I would like that," she said thoughtfully. "We could visit Catherine in San Francisco, maybe travel up the coast. We have never seen the ocean together." "Then that is what we will do," Cole said, smiling. "We will start planning our first real vacation in 20 years. They did travel that summer, taking the train to San Francisco where Catherine met them at the station. It was strange and wonderful to be away from the ranch, to sleep in hotel beds and eat meals they had not prepared themselves. They visited museums and theaters, walked along the waterfront, and spent long evenings with Catherine and her artist friends. But as wonderful as the trip was, they were both happy to return to the ranch, to the familiar rhythms and routines of home. Penelope realized that while she enjoyed traveling, her heart truly belonged to the high desert, to the ranch she and Cole had built together. As the years continued to pass, they settled into a comfortable pattern. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though Cole remained involved in major decisions. Elizabeth proved to be a wonderful addition to the family, and she gave birth to 3 children in quick succession, making Penelope and Cole grandparents. Holding her first grandchild, a boy named James, Penelope felt the circle of life completing itself. She thought about how she had arrived in Randsburg with nothing, just hope and determination. And now she was surrounded by family, by love, by the legacy she and Cole had created together. Catherine eventually married a fellow artist, a kind man named David who supported her career and ambitions. They lived in San Francisco, but visited the ranch regularly, bringing their 2 children to run wild in the same places their mother had played as a child. Connor married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and he and his wife built their own home near Thomas and Elizabeth. Christopher, ever the innovator, moved to Los Angeles to work for one of the early automobile manufacturers, though he returned to visit frequently. By 1920, when Penelope was 52 and Cole was 59, they found themselves with 7 grandchildren and another on the way. The ranch had grown to encompass over 1,000 acres and was one of the most respected operations in Southern California. They had weathered World War I, the Spanish flu pandemic, droughts and floods, boom times and depressions, always together, always supporting each other. One afternoon in the fall of that year, they took a ride together up into the hills above the ranch, something they had not done in years. The horses picked their way carefully up the rocky trail until they reached a spot that overlooked the entire valley. They could see the ranch spread out below them, the house and barns and corrals, the cattle dotting the fields, the creek winding through the cottonwoods. "Look at what we built," Cole said, his voice full of pride and satisfaction. "Look at what we created together." Penelope looked down at the ranch, but more than that, she thought about everything the view represented. A family spread across 3 generations, a business that employed dozens of people and supported the community, friendships that had lasted decades, a love that had only grown stronger with time. "We did well, did we not?" she said, leaning against Cole's shoulder. "We did better than well," Cole replied, wrapping his arm around her. "We built a life worth living together. That is more than most people can say." As they rode back down to the ranch as the sun set behind them, Penelope reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived in Randsburg as a bride for Thomas Xavier, expecting a certain future, a certain life. Instead, she had found Cole, and together they had created something neither of them could have imagined alone. She thought about the moment Cole had asked her to stay and marry him instead, the way her heart had known the answer even before her mind had processed the question. She thought about their wedding day, their children being born, the challenges they had overcome, the joys they had shared. Most of all, she thought about how love, real love, was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, making the choices that built a life together. It was about respect and partnership and genuine friendship underlying the passion. It was about growing together, changing together, becoming better people because of each other. When they reached the barn and dismounted, Thomas came out to meet them. "I was starting to worry," he said, taking the horse's reins. "You were gone longer than I expected." "We were just taking a trip down memory lane," Cole said, smiling, "remembering how it all started." "Tell me," Thomas said, as they walked toward the house where Elizabeth had supper waiting. "I love hearing the story of how you 2 met." So as they sat around the dinner table that night, surrounded by family, Penelope and Cole told the story once again. About the day a young woman stepped off a stagecoach, expecting to marry one Xavier brother and ending up with another. About kindness and courage and taking chances. About building a life together one day at a time. "The important thing," Penelope told her grandchildren, who listened with wide eyes, "is that sometimes the life you end up with is better than the one you planned. Sometimes getting lost leads you exactly where you need to be. And sometimes," Cole added, looking at his wife with eyes still full of love after more than 30 years of marriage, "the person you were meant to find is not the person you thought you were looking for." As the years advanced into the 1920s, Penelope and Cole truly retired from active ranch management, though they remained involved and interested in everything that happened. They had built an empire of sorts, and they watched with pride as their children and grandchildren carried on the legacy. They spent their days together, taking slow walks along the creek, sitting on the porch in the evening, traveling occasionally to visit their scattered children and grandchildren. They held hands constantly, still finding comfort and joy in the simple act of being together. One spring morning in 1928, Cole woke Penelope before dawn. "Come with me," he said softly. "I want to show you something." They walked out to the porch in their nightclothes, wrapped in blankets against the morning chill. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, beautiful in the early light. "30 years ago, I stood on this porch and watched you arrive," Cole said quietly. "I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. I had no idea that the frightened young woman stepping off that stagecoach would become my whole world." "I had no idea either," Penelope said, her eyes filling with tears. "I had no idea that the kind stranger delivering bad news would become the love of my life." They stood together watching the sunrise, much as they had on countless mornings over the decades. The ranch awakened around them, full of the sounds of life continuing, generations growing, the legacy they had built together flourishing. "If you had to do it all over again," Cole asked, "would you make the same choices?" Penelope turned to face her husband, this man she had loved for more than half her life. She touched his weathered face, seeing beyond the gray hair and the lines to the young man who had asked her to stay and marry him instead. "Every single one," she said firmly. "Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow. I would do it all again exactly the same way, because it brought me here to this life with you." Cole kissed her gently, tenderly, with all the love of 30 years of marriage. "Then we are the luckiest people in the world," he whispered. And standing there on the porch of the ranch they had built together, watching another day begin in a life full of love and purpose and meaning, Penelope knew he was absolutely right. She had arrived in Randsburg as a bride for Thomas Xavier, but she had stayed and married Cole instead, and that choice had made all the difference. It had given her a family, a home, a purpose, and a love that had sustained her through everything life could throw at them. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the cool morning air, they went inside to begin another day. There was breakfast to make, grandchildren to spoil, a life to continue living together. And Penelope Xavier, formerly Penelope Norwood of Boston, who had arrived in California with nothing but hope and determination, smiled as she took her husband's hand, knowing she had everything she would ever need. The story of how she came west to marry one brother but stayed to marry another had become family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was simpler than that. It was the story of two people who found each other when they both needed it most, who chose to build a life together, and who loved each other faithfully through all the years that followed. It was, Penelope thought as she mixed batter for pancakes while Cole made coffee, exactly the kind of love story worth living. Not perfect, never easy, but real and true and lasting. The kind of love that built ranches and raised families and left the world a better place than it had been before. And that, she decided, was the very best kind of happily ever after.